All right, welcome to a great webinar with our good friends at Flock. Fritz is an absolute SME in this space, and I'm going to learn a lot from him. And he might learn one or two things from me on some of this case law stuff. But definitely, it's going to be a powerhouse webinar. This is drones as a first responder program, how to build them right from day one. I'll also get out of the way that this is not going to be just for people who do not have a drone program. If you have a program, this is also for you. It's for everyone who operates this and so forth. A lot of you know me, Anthony Bandiero, attorney for Blue to Gold Law Enforcement Training. I like to say this is what I do for a living. I have the honor and the privilege to train cops and prosecutors and so forth around the nation and making good case law. But I have a very special guest. Fritz, how are you?
Good until you told everybody to put their agency in there. It's like pouring in. It's a big crowd.
It's a big
So,
crowd. It's a big crowd. They
yeah,
like to see it
I'd
though. You know,
rather
I mean,
just think
I do
it's
it for
you and
them
me and
because they
just
want
have
to
a
see who's,
conversation.
yeah, they want to see who's here and so
Yeah,
forth. But
yeah.
we have
No, I'm just kidding.
no, it's great. We have agencies from California to New York, from North Dakota to Texas. Fritz, tell
Yeah,
people quickly a little bit about your background, your expertise, and so forth.
sure. So currently, I am the director of DFR consulting for Flock Safety. Um, and basically, I see myself as like a personal trainer almost, or a therapist sometimes for these drone program managers. So as we're selling DFR to our customers, there's a team that handles all the install of the hardware and the software and the integration with their systems. And then I'll typically develop a partnership with a drone program manager, maybe a handful of SMEs in the agency, their key pilots. And I'll get them, of course, first step is to get them their waiver so they can fly beyond visual line of sight
Yep.
and make sure they have the policies in place. They understand the training requirements, get them training manuals. Basically, just there's a lot to starting a drone program. DFR particularly, it's complex. It takes some time. It takes some learning. So my goal is to like shorten the learning curve for them. These guys are typically this is one of many of their projects in their agency. It's a collateral duty. Some of them haven't even done drone programs until they ended up getting DFR. And so me and my team basically helps them go from zero to hero in terms of understanding what it means to have a DFR program and do it correctly. And part of which what we're going to talk about today is do it in a way that's transparent and accountable and sustainable.
I love it. So our, the way we're going to structure this is that, Fritz and I are just going to have a conversation. He does not know everything I'm going to talk about today. I definitely gave him a high level. Hey, I'm going to talk about these issues, but he may have some questions. And you may have some questions. Now, you can tell that there are hundreds and hundreds of people here right now, and you're going to have questions. And that does not include the shoulder surfers, right? So take the people here, plus you have people behind looking at the video as well. That's great. Now, I will try to, and Fritz as well, will try to keep a track of the chats and so forth. If we see something that is a good question, we want to kind of address it, we will. However, I think that most of these questions may have to be at the end purely because of the amount of content that we have. But also recognize we've allotted 2 hours to be here. I think we're going to take every minute of it because we have a lot to say. So the other thing too is a takeaway. Blue to Gold put together a drones law book for every single state. This is basically it's going to have the things I'm going to talk about today. Some of the constitutional issues I see, how states are reacting to the deployment of drones, and some of the laws overly restrictive. Some are not restricted at all. They're actually in line with the Fourth Amendment. They're just repeating what the Fourth Amendment says, and so forth. But if you want that, plus a summary of what I think the laws are saying in your state, plus an actual copy of the laws, go to Blue to Gold store and you can download for free. It's absolutely for free. We did it just for this webinar and so forth as far as letting you download for free. All right, and then Teresa, who is our social media manager, she'll put in a link, or Rick, somebody will put a link to that book. All right. Disclaimers: you can't have any kind of legal training without having some disclaimers. At least that's what they tell me. The first thing is that Fritz and I don't know your policies. We don't necessarily know all of your state laws. We're going to talk about some high level stuff, some best practices. I certainly know a lot of what's kind of going on out there, and every state has to comply with the Fourth Amendment, and I'm going to focus on that. if you have any doubt or doing out there, if you're not sure about, hey, is this legal or is this a best practice? Talk to whoever's above you, right? Talk to your county prosecutor, talk to, your chief and so forth. They should have some answers for you. And finally, this course is legal education, not legal advice. Okay. I think what I want to do though is before I even get into the Fourth Amendment, Fritz, can you kind of kick it off a little bit, and let us know, like, people looking at starting a drone program, what are some of those things that they should be considering and so forth? Like, have that conversation as somebody walked into your door and
Sure.
says, please.
Yeah, so there, you've mentioned drone program. So there is a broader term meaning drone program, but that could include drone as first responder versus drone like patrol-led deployment, like taking a drone out of your trunk and flying it by hand. And they're two different distinct types of concept of operations. At Flock Safety, we're dealing mostly or primarily with drone as first responder. Most of the conversation might be related to that, but I'm sure a lot of it's going to address both areas.
Yep.
But patrol led is, the traditional flying by hand, guys hiding in the backyard, you got to throw up a drone, those type of drone calls. DFR is pre-positioned drones ready to go at a moment's notice, typically to 911 calls, some alert like an LPR license plate reader hit, alarm went off, a gunshot detection, a guy on a radio asking for help or whatever. So you're going to be sending this to many more incidents throughout the day, a wider variety of incidents than just typical drone type calls. It's going to be going to every kind of police call. And that's a really complex problem to solve. Not only technically, got to have the right drone, got to have the right dock system, got to have the right software, you got to have it integrated into an ecosystem that's receiving this information in real time. Certainly, hopefully, before it becomes CAD, so you get certain. That's Flock Safety's bread and butter is this pre-CAD data, like your LPR hits, your gunshot detections, your 911 streaming audio, and letting the pilot who's monitoring all these things respond immediately and ideally get to the scene before ground units so that you actually know what you're going into. You can see the future this way. Is it even a police call? 20-30% of the calls from our customers, they realize they don't have to send any ground units. It's
Right.
no longer happening. It's not police related. Maybe we send different resources there. So DFR really is a way to see the future, respond more effectively, more safely. But what comes with that is a lot of effort on the part of the agency in terms of understanding the process, getting the right hardware, joining a right team, the right vendor that has all the components, more of a turnkey system. And then, like you said, hopefully have people that can respond to inquiries from the community and be able to explain it right, and then have internal policies and protocols that maintain its credibility, its accountability, so that we don't, as police departments, lose this great tool to serve the community.
Well, I definitely, you said great tool. I think I know that drones are, it's a watershed moment for law enforcement. I mean, it's up there with the police radio. It's up there with bulletproof vests. The capabilities are obviously
You got a
extreme,
lot of
but
chiefs saying it's like transformative, right?
it's
Once they see it in action, there's no going back.
well, actually, I saw that quote actually. Somebody that deployed one of your systems, and they said, once you go drone, you can't go back and not have a drone. And that's one of the reasons why I know I'm here is because I want to live in a community that has drones, right? Police drones and DFR and so forth. That's where I want to live because I know that if I have a call for service, if I need police assistance, that drone can really be the difference between catching the bad guy. It could be for lives saved and so forth. But I think about all these small agencies out there that are not going to have maybe the budget to have like a full DFR, the drone in the box and all the right places and so forth. But I presume it's still, I mean, you maybe do have a patrol car, a pilot that's pushing a black and white, but he does have or she does have a drone in the trunk. That's okay too, right? That's a first step.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think drones in general add value. You're just seeing the sky, you're seeing a situation from above, from an angle you're not used to. I mean, we're typically operating in 2D on the ground level, understanding just what's basically around us. And for anyone to have that top-down view of a situation and be able to see all four sides of a house simultaneously, it's huge. So the value of drones is kind of well understood. And now it's like what about having this capability on each and every call? Like I said, not just like, oh, this call should have a drone. How about every call, a DV, a park driveway, or block driveway, a fight in the park? What happens when you have um, this capability on each and every call? And not only that, do you have the angle, but you have someone who's not in harm's way, who's
Right.
watching the feed, communicating with ground units, you know, having them stage, asking for the right resources, basically managing the incident. Typically, if ground level guys are their hearts racing, they've been blowing lights trying to get to this emergency, they're in harm's way, they're worried about their safety, etc. And now you have someone who's, going as a crow fly, getting there before anybody's in harm's way and seeing the world from the top. It is transformative once they have it. And like I said, you start sharing that feed internally with command staff, with chiefs, with others, and they've been used to sort of imagining what's happening by what they're hearing on the radio, and now they see it in real time. Then you just have a lot better understanding of how to respond, and you just get better responses.
All right. I do have, as I said, I have a slide deck of some stuff. Is there anything else you want to maybe touch on before I get into some constitutional issues?
Not, I mean, I think this is a little discussed part of it. I mean, I answer all questions all day. I didn't say my background's in law enforcement. I'm a retired captain out of Chula Vista Police Department.
Nice.
Started the first drone program there and worked with the team to really like get this ball rolling. So I've kind of been living it for the last 7 years, and talking to, we have almost 200 customers or free customers that I'm dealing with on a daily basis. So a lot of questions come out of this. The ones I have the hardest time answering are, those related to the Fourth Amendment stuff. I think there's just very little training that way, and I don't think we're going to answer all the questions.
Right.
I think you never really understand the right. Like, there's going to be arguments on search and seizure and Fourth Amendment. There still is, right? You got that
That's right.
Louis Mangiano case where they still don't know if that was a good search or not, right? That's the whole point of going to court and having case law. But giving the listeners, the drone program managers, the tools, and then also have the ability to tell the community, hey, I was exposed to training. I care about Fourth Amendment. We're doing what best to comply with it and understand how it's impacted when we're flying over the community and responding to calls via drone. So yeah, I think it's gonna be a good conversation and something that's about time.
No, and absolutely. And I think, and not to brag, but I don't know I don't think this conversation is happening enough, and that's why I mean, look, clearly a lot of people are here; they're interested in this. So we're going to do a good job with this, and we're going to save some time at the end for Q&A. But but look, for the people that are here, obviously Fritz is your guy. He knows all the answers to your questions. You're probably not going to ask him something he has not probably gone over and thought about. So just keep that in mind. So if you have a question, put in the chat. But let's talk about the Fourth Amendment here. So let me just share my screen. All right. Well, look, I like to say it all starts with the Fourth Amendment, because that's especially with the constitutional issues right now. The Fourth Amendment is only 54 words. It's really not that long, and we can read it. And this was passed in December 15, 1791. It was written by James Madison. He and his peers wrote down this. They said, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. And no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, in particular describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now, these 54 words are essentially going to control the majority of our behavior when it comes to technology. And the Fourth Amendment is really not that descriptive. I like to say, Fritz, I mean, bear with me, but I like reading and listening to audiobooks about colonial history. Maybe you do too, a little bit, right? It's kind of interesting, right? To hear about the framers.
You might be alone on that.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm alone. But there's a few of us out there, and I listen to these guys, and I see what they wrote. I see what they wrote in the First Amendment. I see what they wrote in the Second Amendment, and I see what they wrote in the Fourth Amendment. And I got to tell you, I think they're kind of lazy, because I don't know. I don't see anything in here about drones. I don't see anything in here about even searching a wagon or a ship. I see nothing about searching a person's bag. I see nothing. All I see is one type of search or seizure prohibited. And what type is that? The audience will tell me. There's only one type of search or seizure that's prohibited by the Fourth Amendment. What type is that? And Darren, my attorney, said, I believe he might be, I think he's probably an attorney. He said unreasonable. So therefore, if you're being reasonable, you're being 100% lawful and constitutional. Now, isn't that the main issue, right, Fritz? Like, what does it mean to be unreasonable? Because I can assure you, we're going to go through some cases today, and no matter what side, like either the defendant or the cops, whatever, if they're arguing something, they probably feel that they're being reasonable.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about whether the court agreed with that or not, but it's not what a person feels, it's what they can articulate. And this is one of the seminal things that we teach over here is that to be reasonable means you have the acronym CREW. And that's going to be very important for our discussion today. In other words, if we are deploying this drone, right? UAS, you want to be bougie about it, but the drone, if you're deploying in a way that implicates the Fourth Amendment, then you have to ask yourself, do you have CREW? Do you have consent to do what you're doing, right? We can search people's cars and houses, and we can, be intrusive if we have their consent. If you don't have their consent, the next thing is look at as a recognized exception. There are tons of recognized exceptions out there. There's the exigency exception. There's hot pursuit. There's fresh pursuit. There is booking exceptions. There's inventories, et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have that, you're going to need a warrant. And I like to say that CREW does not stand for can't really explain why. If it implicates the Fourth Amendment and you're being called on a carpet by it, either by internally or by the court or in a lawsuit, you got to have CREW. Okay. Now, you cannot have a drone conversation without talking about curtilage. And, Fritz, you've obviously heard this word 1,000 times, but in my experience, a lot of cops don't actually understand curtilage. Is that a safe statement for you too?
Yeah, that's safe. Yeah.
And they're
I'd
kind of,
actually like to, before we go on, go
yeah,
back
please.
and hit on a couple of things you just talked about. One was the reasonable. That's been pretty much the answer I give for a lot of questions, that there is no like stated policy or law on it. Like, what kind of training do we have to have? What kind of inspections do we do on our dock systems? And it comes down to reasonableness. And so that's unsatisfying, I think, especially
It
early
is.
stage where you want all the answers. And it's kind of frustrating that we don't have like a black and white. And a lot of times, like search and seizure in general, you don't get the black and white answers. But like you said, having the tools to be able to articulate the reasons why you did it, having the elements, the first principles of what you're trying to do. And so again, that I think that's a good word that we're going to come back to, because people are going to be leaving this training maybe frustrated, but it goes back to reasonableness, right?
And go ahead.
Yeah, and then and I wanted to just get that out before we get to curtilage, because we're getting into the details.
We're getting to the deets, but the other thing I want to share, since you brought this reasonableness, is a lot of officers believe that their quote unquote their good faith will actually get them out of legal problems. And when cops say good faith, they mean, hey, I had a good heart. I didn't know. I didn't know that this was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. I just thought I was doing my job and trying to do it the best job I could. And we have to say that that's great. I mean, we want officers to, have a good, mentality. They don't want to violate people's rights, of course. But we also have to recognize that there is no quote unquote good faith exception for warrantless searches and seizures. Good faith applies to judicial pre-approval, right? And defective search warrants, defective arrest warrants, and maybe laws that are later proven to be unconstitutional. But I think that's important because it is one of the most misunderstood concepts in law enforcement. In my experience, I've taught over 70,000 cops, and a lot of them think that their good faith will get them out of legal problems, and unfortunately it'll get them out of IA. Maybe it'll
Right.
it'll cause the chief to be like, you know what, I can save you because you made a
Sure.
mistake, but it's not going to be what's in your heart; it's what's in your brain.
Yep.
And I think one of the most important quotes when it comes to curtilage is this: curtilage is part of the home for Fourth Amendment purposes, according to Florida versus Hardinas, U.S. Supreme Court. And this is a big one, because anytime you elevate something as part of the home, then you are saying it is the most protected thing under the Fourth Amendment. There are all kinds of things that we do without warrants to people, their cars, and so forth. And it's routine, right? We search cars routinely with probable cause and so forth in most states. But when it comes to homes, you have to be very, very careful because you can violate a person's civil rights more easily when it comes to the home than it comes to their person. And so these four factors come from a case called Dunn, Dunn, and it's a Supreme Court case that lays out the four factors that we need to consider about whether or not a piece of property actually is curtilage. Now, curtilage is usually not a building, right? Buildings are protected under the Fourth Amendment and so forth. It's a piece of property. And so when does a piece of property turn from open fields that really gets almost no protection under the Fourth Amendment, very, very little protection, to actually being part of the home, which is the highest protections there is, protection for under the Fourth Amendment at least, and it's these four factors. The first one is adjacent. The closer you are to that home, right? The closer you're looking at, you're using that drone, you're looking at something right in their backyard, and that backyard is close to their home, it's more likely that you're actually looking in an area that's considered curtilage. The next thing is enclosure. The courts do consider whether or not the area is enclosed. I will tell you that is not a mandatory factor. There are plenty of people on this webinar right now that actually have a backyard that's not fenced in. Maybe they live in a rural area and they don't need a fence. Now, most people do have some kind of enclosure because they're living in urban areas. However, it does help. The other factor is use, and that is the second most important factor. So adjacent and use are absolutely the most important factors. What they mean by this is that area is psychologically and physically associated with domestic life. It's the barbecue pits, it's the cornhole, it's the lawn furniture, it's the jacuzzi. Though, and where the kids play, those are areas that are associated with domestic activities. And finally, site screening. The court is simply saying that, and we're going to see this actually play out in a few of our similar cases, but the court is simply saying, hey, when people have a structure or they do something to hide something with tarps and so forth, then they exhibit more expectation of privacy. Now, the other thing we have to talk about before we get into our seminal aerial surveillance cases is what even is a search under the Fourth Amendment. Now, when I ask students, Fritz, in my classes, hey, what is a search, right? If you were on the stand and an attorney says, officer, what is a search under the Fourth Amendment? Do you know that most officers actually do not know what a search is?
You're putting me on the line here.
No, I'm not. I didn't end up with a question mark. I didn't put you on. You're not the SME with the Fourth Amendment stuff. I don't want you to take my job. I'm just pointing out that I think that since we're here and we're having a good discussion about it, I think that we should be cognizant that is not, we should know what a search is. Just like we have to know what probable cause is, we should at least be able to define what a search is. Okay, well, first of all, there are two searches under the Fourth Amendment, and both of these are going to play a part in today's discussion. You have to know both, at least conceptually, right? The first one is what they call a reasonable expectation of privacy. Most cops, if they dig deep, they can come up with this one. They'll say something, well, privacy. Okay, fine. I'll take that as an answer. The next one is trespass. And this one, I got to tell you, it can get a little tricky with the drones because trespass is talking about a physical trespass. And drones rarely physically trespass, but they can. And we actually have a case called Maxon where that was actually brought up as an issue. Okay. And someone says, can you fly over a school campus? The answer is yes, because a school campus does not have curtilage and you have no, I'm just saying from a constitutional point of view, it's not going to be protected like the home. So I see no issue there constitutionally. And of course, if you have questions about Part 107 and all this other issues, that's a Fritz question. That's not an Anthony question. Okay. So what is an expectation of privacy? Okay, so what happened here is this is a case called Katz. Now, Katz is a bookie living in LA, and he's doing bookmaking conversations over the phone, and the FBI listened to his conversation. And this goes down. Well, the case is decided 1967, and Charles Katz, is trying to say this was a search under the Fourth Amendment, and the U.S. Supreme Court agrees. They said that a person has a reasonable expectation of privacy in their private conversations. And now the word privacy does not exist in the Constitution at all. However, the Supreme Court has held that it exists, at least implicitly. And so the first thing that you have to establish about whether or not you have privacy is, did the suspect expect privacy? Did they really subjectively think that they had privacy in whatever we found out? And secondly, is this legitimate? There are a lot of things that people will love to keep secret, but it's not legitimate, right? If I'm a felon and I possess a firearm, and my firearm is under the seat of my car, and but the handle is sticking out slightly. Well, I don't want people looking in my car. Let's say I'm parked at the In-N-Out Burger, and I don't want people, looking in my car. However, if a nosy cop comes over with their flashlight, whatever, and looks into the windshield of my car and sees the butt of that gun, I don't have expectation of privacy. Why? Because it's not legitimate. It's plain view. Right to be, right to see. Both are required. Okay, so we have that. That's a two-part test. Lawyers like that test. It keeps them employed because the more complicated you can get and so forth. For my cops.
So I do have
yeah, please jump in.
Not even a question. So, and one of the questions actually sparked it. Can you fly over a school campus? So there, maybe
Yep.
we dissect that question. I think I know what they meant, but there is no limit to where you can fly in terms of, once you have the FAA waiver, you can fly over anything. Like there's nothing on the ground that you can't fly over in terms of houses versus schools, et cetera. I think what he meant is, can you fly over a school campus, look down and see what's going on down there? And then you have the privacy issues. So the right to be issue is, the first part of what you had said.
Yep.
And the drones have a right to be up there, right? Assuming you have the FAA permissions and your pilots are trained and you're flying within your certificate of waiver. That's different than what can you look down at? Where do you have to be when you look down on it? How close can you zoom in, and how can you use that evidence, et cetera?
So and we're going to dive into that too, because I think it's important questions. And somebody's actually bringing up, Jeffrey's bringing up, can we apply these airplane cases? Can we apply the helicopter case in Riley? Can we apply those cases to drones? And the answer is absolutely yes, with very important limitations. Limitations that are just real limitations, like, meaning, I like to say a helicopter is not a drone. Okay. Yes, they have a lot in common, but the Supreme Court is not going to say, in my view, that everything we said in 1986 is 100% applicable to a 1-pound drone. They are going to put some limitation on it, and it's not because of the drone. It's because of the capabilities of the drone, right? It's the sensors. It's the capabilities. The fact that it's flying, that has a lot. That looks almost similar to what happened in these Supreme Court cases. But the answer is that we're going to take those cases, we're going to jump from there and actually start putting some best practices in place, because we are in dire need of high-level drone cases. But the reality is that every technology, I don't care if it was flashlights, there's case law on flashlights from like the 1920s. There's case law on, there's case law on listening devices from the 1960s. But all of these cases, and there's thermal imaging from 2001, all of these cases took years to percolate through the system, because the justices are always, at least in general, like a decade behind technology, at least, to get real, like, high level Supreme Court cases. But before I move on, generally when it comes to right of privacy, what a person knowingly exposes to the public is not protected by the Fourth Amendment. So that gun, they didn't want to see it. They didn't want somebody to see it, but it was put there in a place that somebody could look down and so forth. All right, so let's talk about our seminal aerial surveillance cases. 1986 was a big year. The Supreme Court actually issued 2 seminal aerial surveillance cases, and the first one is California versus Ceriolo. Okay, so what happened here is that officers got into a fixed-wing airplane and looked into Ceriolo's backyard from 1,000 feet. And they made a naked eye observation of marijuana growing in that backyard. So they are looking in curtilage. That's important. It's not if it's an open field, we probably have really no issue. But they said there's two things that they said that I want to make sure that if we're going to use these cases to defend drone use, well, they did say two things that they really thought were important. Number one, they said the observations took place in naval airspace in a physically non-intrusive manner. Okay, that's pretty easy. And they also said that the plants were readily discernible with the naked eye as marijuana. Now, are we saying that you cannot use magnification? The answer is no. We also have cases that talk about using binoculars and, just from not necessarily in the air. We have one case from the air, um, a case out of South Dakota where the cop used binoculars to see a marijuana grow. Um, so they usually courts will presume that naked eye also means magnification, right? But that can be also you can cross the line with that too. But regardless, our training point from Cirillo is that physically unintrusive naked eye observations from navigable airspace is not a search. Okay. Now, I looked at the definition of navigable airspace and so forth. Um, is it kind of obvious that drones, if they're flying per the law and so forth, that they are also, if they're below 400 feet, that they also
Mhm.
are regardless in navigable airspace?
That what's the question? If they're in,
Yeah, I said it kind of convoluted, but look, so all these cases, right, that I'm talking
right,
about, many of them talk about, hey, the aircraft was flown in navigable airspace. In other words, it was flown lawfully per the FAA regulations.
right,
In Part 107, below 400 feet and so forth.
right.
But
Let's
if
assume all that. Let's assume it's within FAA regulations and it's
right,
flying where it's supposed to be. Um, yeah, and
because
that's
when I look at these cases involving drones, I mean, that is, and I'm trying to tie it into the Supreme Court case from 1986, and they're
mhm,
talking about naval airspace. Well, drones are also flown in naval airspace, right? Even though it's
yeah,
below, that is,
below 400.
navigation doesn't
Yeah,
mean you're flying human beings, right?
right. No, no. It just means it's up there and flying legally above the ground. And
Yes,
my question really is, you said naked eye. I mean, there's no such thing as a naked eye with a drone, right? We're always using some camera enhancement. And how does
correct.
that impact things?
Well, I think it does, and I tell you, I think that's probably one of the biggest. I think that's one of the biggest issues that the court is going to have to decide because plain view is right to be right to see. That's easy, and using a camera is not going to be the issue, right? Using a camera to see something in plain view is not what it's going to be. Is using like magnification and looking into windows and of course thermal imaging, which you already have a case on, which we'll talk about briefly. But at what point, right? What point do we cross that line? At what point does an officer turn the drone from plain view, hovering over the park, looking into the backyard and seeing a stolen car? To me, I got no problem with that. To actually looking into the guy's windows and seeing a kilo of cocaine on the kitchen table. What questions will the court ask to determine whether or not that was a search under the Fourth Amendment? Because we do know that we have cases, whether it's Hardiness, Florida versus Hardiness, we have other cases where um, cops have been on curtilage, lawfully present,
Hmm.
but they did something that was over the top. They climbed up on a fence and they looked into the backyard. They looked into the little knot holes to see into the backyard. And the court said, "Look, you were lawfully present for the knock and talk, but what you did crossed the line." And it's those type of questions that we're going to have to be able to answer and kind of have an idea about when we fly these drones, because unless we have a warrant or exigency, we don't want to cross certain lines. And it's my job, and it's not going to be I'm not going to be able to do it today because 2 hours is not enough time, but it's my job to try to train these pilots to have a good intuition, and that's the right word, by the way. It's intuition because it can't be black and white, to know whether or not when they are crossing that line and making bad case law. But you'll see what I have today. It'll definitely set the stage.
So you mentioned that you could look in a backyard and see a stolen car, and that's fine. So if you and this comes up as a terms of a question, I send a drone to a domestic violence incident. I just want to get a situational awareness while the ground units are arriving, and I see some activity in the backyard. I run the plate of a car back there. It comes back stolen. Um, what are the Fourth Amendment issues there?
Well, I think we'll be fine. I mean, obviously, there's a couple things here. First of all, let's just presume that we're being intrusive here. Okay, in other words, let's presume we're implicating the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is implicated when we intrusive on the privacy interest. Because if we're
Okay,
not being
so instead of the
intrusive,
car, we're looking in the window to see if there's a fight or something
but
with
I
the
also
camera.
like your example though because I like the running the
Okay.
plate. Okay,
Okay.
so let's just presume that we are implicating the Fourth Amendment because we may not be, but let's just presume we are. We are. Let's say we're actually intentionally looking into windows to see if we see the suspect hitting his spouse, barricading himself, whatever.
Right.
We also we also write down the plate number and run it, and that comes back stolen. The
Okay.
question is, would we have crew? Well, we don't have consent, we don't have a warrant. Do we have a recognized exception? Answer is yes, because and I haven't we don't have the fact pattern that you just basically I'm presuming there's exigency there.
Sure. Yeah, a
But
domestic 911 call of a domestic violence
yeah,
at that
yeah, I mean
location.
that takes a
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have to know the facts. But regardless, most of these calls are exigency. They're legit. They're
Hmm.
not just, hey, they're yelling at each
Sure.
other. Can you go break it up? Um, could the officer on the ground sneak up to that house and look into the window and see if he sees something dangerous? The answer is yes. So the drone can do the same thing. That's why it's good in my view. Now, running the plate had nothing to do with that domestic call. It helps. It does not help one iota for safety and so forth. But are we good? The answer is yes, because if you're allowed to see into that backyard, which you would be,
Hmm.
then it's plain view. And what you do with that information, you what you do with that plate is up to you, right? It's right to be, right to see. And once you have that information, if you run it, that itself is not a implication of a Fourth Amendment. That's not a Fourth Amendment issue
Great.
with that fact pattern. Okay.
So
S-
one recommendation we made from the very beginning, and we tell almost all of our customers are compliant with this, but just as best practice, that you'd only respond a DFR mission to an actual incident, call for service or something. And I think it's to directly address that issue is to have legitimacy in terms of what you do once you get in there. And you're just driving around running plates trying to find stolen, you're probably going to have an issue.
oh, I can't agree with you more. And
Yeah.
I can, and I'm gonna show a publication that Flock produced, which I thought was really really good because it says really that like you have to have your parameters for deployment. Okay, Dow Chemical versus U.S. Real quick, this is a case involving the EPA wants to survey the Dow Chemical plant. For some reason, they told the EPA to go pound sand, come back with a warrant. They did not go get a warrant. Instead, they hired a professional commercial photographer to fly over a 2,000-acre plant and record it and uh, surveil it at a very minute level. Okay, they flew at 12,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 1,000 feet, and they got the evidence that they were violating various EPA laws. Dow Chemical says this implicated the Fourth Amendment rights. The Supreme Court rightfully said, "Look, you don't have that kind of privacy in a 2,000 industrial plant, a 2,000 square acre. I said maybe square foot, but a 2,000 acre industrial plant that's not curtilage." And that's very, very important. This is our seminal case that basically says that if there is no reasonable expectation of privacy in the area itself, like a backyard, curtilage, then there really is no search under the Fourth Amendment. So when students, officers on here and so forth are saying, hey, what about the prisons and what about the schools? The first question I ask is that aerial surveillance even protected by the Fourth Amendment? And the answer is almost going to always be no, because it's more like a Dow chemical plant than it is like a backyard. So the takeaway is that non-curtilage areas don't have reasonable expectation of privacy. However, they did put this in there. They did say surveillance of private property. When they say private property, they're talking about, the businesses and barns that are not in curtilage by using highly sophisticated surveillance equipment not generally available to the public, such as satellite technology, might be constitutionally prescribed absent a warrant. Well, we do know that Google and all these other companies take photos of your backyard and so forth. However, it's just saying that, guys, there can be a line being crossed, okay? Just like on the ground, you can cross a line, you can cross that line in the air. And we are going to talk about this comment, though, which this comment that the Supreme Court has made several times, which is, hey, if it almost comes off as, hey, if it is generally available to the public, then it's game on. I want to caution everyone here that I don't think that's what they meant. Okay, they're putting it in there as a factor, as hey, it's kind of like, if you can go to Walmart, I guess, and you can get binoculars and you can get flashlights and so forth. Well, then it's really in other words, what they're saying here is when you live in a technological advanced society, you should understand that you are going to be surveilled to some degree. However, we got to be careful with that logic because I do hear it a lot, and that's why I harp on this a little bit. I do think that the Supreme Court said it, at least the 1980 Supreme Court said it, but the 2026 Supreme Court didn't mean it. And I'll tell you what I mean in a second. Kylo is a case involving a thermal imager, okay? And they looked at a house, they saw that it was abnormally hot, the garage especially, compared to the neighbors. They suspected a marijuana grow. They put that observation, the thermal imaging observation, into a warrant, and the U.S. Supreme Court said timeout, okay? You're basically finding out things that were unknowable to a person with the naked eye. You're crossing that line. I mean, the opinion was written by Scalia, and he talked about how thermal imaging could one day see a woman taking her bath, and you can see other intimate activity inside the home, and that certainly is true in 2026, right? The actual case, Kylo, I think it happened like 10 years before 2001, but very old school, primitive thermal imager, and they said, "Hey, we got to think about the future here." And the other thing that they said is that the Supreme Court has increasingly viewed the Fourth Amendment they also talked about, this it's in general public use. But the problem that I have with this, and the thing I want to just have some caution to the wind, is that the modern Supreme Court makeup with Alito and Thomas and so forth, they are originalists. And what they're trying to say here is, and this is also Carpenter, and these are all just cases that some people may know, but a lot of Supreme Court cases coming out on the Fourth Amendment are talking about the original intent of the Fourth Amendment, meaning they're kind of moving away from the living, breathing document analogies, meaning maybe it's not really subject to change that much. Maybe when Madison said no unreasonable searches and seizures, maybe if he knew about drones, he would say this, right? If he knew about thermal imaging, he would say that. That's what they're trying, that's the lens they're looking at it. And so the reason why I think this is important is because when you say, well, as long as the public can get it, we can use it. That is not really true. It's a factor for sure. But in 20 years from now, you're going to be able to walk into or go online, I should say. You probably won't have a store, but you'll be able to go online and pretty much grab everything off the shelf that the cops have, right? All the advanced drones and so forth. In fact, you can get them now. They're just expensive. So it's not in general public use because of cost. But the cost is going to come down. So I just want officers to recognize that argument is thin, in my view, because of the originalist arguments that are coming out from the Supreme Court. Fritz.
Let me ask some clarification questions. So, and I should say that flock safety drone cameras are pretty good, but they're not good enough to see people in their bathtubs.
Yep.
So the thermal, and can't even see through glass. So we see heat signatures, and it's great for finding lost individuals, hiding suspects, etc. And when you're talking about the use of this kind of not off the shelf technology, you're only referring it to in terms of, a privacy issue on private, not looking at publicly available spaces like you're talking about, right?
Game on. It's
okay.
Game on,
and
right?
I saw some of the questions we're asking that too.
No, I think that's a very important question. I'm glad when we're talking, really, it's these homes. It's not cars. It's not storage sheds that are off curtilage. If it's on curtilage, we have maybe an implication there. It's really the homes. You're not going to see a lot of cases that say that the drone crossed the line in a public space. You're really not.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
we can equate those, Fritz, to poll cameras. Our poll camera cases are really, they're almost uniform in saying that they're not searches. Now, I get paid to think about these issues and go into the weeds. I do think I have a poll camera webinar, and I think that at some point you may be crossing a line. However, but poll cameras are a great example. Okay, so look, thank you for clarifying that because I think it is important. But just keep it in your mind that just because they said that you can buy it from Walmart, type analogy, doesn't necessarily mean that you can do whatever you want with it. You still have some restrictions. Okay. And I'm going to get to, trust me, when Fritz and I get to the end of this, we're going to talk about some best practices. Here's a key drone case that talks about Dow Chemical and so forth. Real quick, there's a 2023 case, very recent. Stevens is a presumptively or allegedly drunk driver. He crashes, he flees, he goes home, he parks his car 280 feet from his house. The police deploy a drone and they see the car in plain view. They use that evidence to kind of prove that he was our hit and run driver. And Stevens says, "Oh, you violated my rights because you're using this drone to see my car and it's in my backyard." Well, the first question you have to ask is that even a private area? And the court rightfully and easily dismissed those arguments because it's open field. Being 280 feet from your house is not going to be curtilage in almost any scenario. So they said that while the use of drones as a tool for criminal investigations is currently an undeveloped area of the law, and we definitely know that, we're talking about it right now, we find no reason to distinguish the use of the drone in this case from other areas of surveillance like Dow Chemical. Okay, the camera attached to the drone was similar to a cell phone or iPad camera. Both were what? Readily available. There's that language again, right? But they are saying that it wasn't over the top. But I got to tell you, I don't think it matters. Even if they're just putting, look, they're putting it in there because why not? It's part of the case, right, Fritz?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But I got to tell you, if that drone was a mile away and it used the most high-tech camera to see that car, we're in the same position. We're still in a Dow Chemical type situation. It doesn't matter if you see it from 13,000 feet or a mile away horizontally, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter. Okay, Florida versus Riley. What happened here? Now we're going to hop into a helicopter. Really, this case, this is actually not 1985. I think it's 1989. Somebody correct me on this. I might have to correct that. I don't think that's the right citation. But regardless, what we have here is Riley. This is a helicopter case. They fly at 400 feet. So why is this different from Siriolo? Is because they were at 1,000 feet. Now they're at 400 feet, and Riley's trying to make the argument that this is not navigable airspace, this is dangerous, and so forth. Daryl says it is 1989. Thank you very much. And the point being is that he's trying to say this is different than what happened in Siriolo. Looking in my backyard, my greenhouse, seeing the marijuana. And at the end of the day, the Supreme Court weighed heavily on following the rules. Was it unlawful for a helicopter to fly at 400 feet? The answer is no. And this is their italicized, by the way. It says, but it is of obvious importance that the helicopter in this case was not violating the law. Okay.
So is that a right to be issue then?
It's a right to be. Correct.
Okay. So they're trying to win the case on the fact that they shouldn't have even been there at that low.
Yeah, he's saying, it's over my curtilage. And it certainly was, right? We're going to talk about over curtilage cases. It's over my curtilage. It's 400 feet. He's trying to make the argument that 500 feet is the minimums, but that applies to airplanes.
Right.
Doesn't really apply to helicopters. But the one thing that is actually very interesting is that usually the Supreme Court does not say that the Fourth Amendment is controlled by law. It's controlled by precedent. It's controlled by historical, what the intent was and so forth. However, when it comes to drone cases and it comes to airplane, aero surveillance, they always talk about following the rules, which is that is not common in other case law. So I want you, it's kind of a trivia thing. It's like, this is the one area of the law that the Supreme Court seems to care about following the rules. But there's plenty of examples where cops didn't follow the rules. They broke the law, but the Supreme Court says breaking the law is not a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Neither is there any intimation here that the helicopter interfered with respondents' normal use of the greenhouse or other parts of the curtilage. That's going to come in a second here. Okay, let's keep moving. What's our main takeaway here? If the pilot, right, whether it's UAS, whether it's a manned flight and so forth, complying with all laws and not being overly intrusive, then no search has occurred. What does it mean to be overly intrusive? We're going to have to just keep talking about it and trying to figure that out because I have some ideas. Let's talk about a case that didn't go so well for the police officers, and it maybe is a little obvious, okay? These officers, I'm trying to do my little AI video here, right, Fritz? Can I give me some credit, okay? It's a little weird. He looks a little big for that helicopter, but you know what? I'm trying over here,
You get the
Fritz. I'm
idea.
trying. What happened here is in Sneed is that police got into a helicopter and went 20 to 25 feet above the guy's curtilage to go look at a plant. The problem here is that does intrude on a person's reasonable expectation of privacy, and it's also a physical trespass. So this is not like Riley. This is an intrusion. So at what point? I mean, even though you have 0 to 400. Well, when you're flying, I will tell you that I think one thing is when you're flying over curtilage, you do have to think about how low can I go without implicating the Fourth Amendment. And we're going to get into that. Okay. Okay. A key
Do you
drone
think the
case, please.
size and the noisiness, the size of the helicopter had an issue?
I think the noisiness absolutely had a factor.
The disruptive factor of the
It
helicopter, something so big and loud, that low.
loud, and you can't enjoy, like, even if there was nobody back there, right? I mean, presumptively
Right.
there was nobody in that backyard. But even the fact that there was nobody back there using it at this time, it's still an invasion. Just because I'm not in my backyard right now doesn't mean I don't have an expectation of privacy in it right now. So regardless, they shouldn't have done that. Okay, so now we're going to kind of take our Riley case and some of the other cases, and we're going to talk about Dirks. What happened in Dirks, in a nutshell, 2022 case is that Dirks. Okay, so Dirks's wife gets committed, civilly committed, for a mental issue. The kids go to school. They're very upset that mom got taken away. The teacher tells the police, or like one of the counselors tells the police, hey, these kids are really upset. Why don't you go? Actually, it was, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The kids were not at school. Okay. They were like the school counselor was like, hey, mom got taken away. Can you go check on the kids? That's what it was. Can you go check on the kids? Because they might be upset and so forth. The cops arrive. They talk to Dirks, the husband. He is very upset that his wife got committed, and pulled from the house the day before.
Mhm.
And he says, "You're not going to check on my kids," and he closes the door. They treat Dirks as a barricaded subject, and really, if for my people here that are looking at this through the lens of the Fourth Amendment, this is probably a little overboard because he doesn't have an obligation to show his kids to the government if there's no particular allegation that the kids are in danger. Not with these facts, okay? Not with these facts. It was basically a welfare check. But they treat him as a barricade subject. They call the SWAT team out. The SWAT team deploys the drone, and they look into his window. He sues civilly for that. And the court threw out almost all of his allegations against the government, except 4 allegations. And this is one of them that they did not throw out. They said the court finds the plaintiffs have plausibly alleged that the drone search intruded upon their reasonable expectation of privacy as to the curtilage surrounding their home and allegations and so forth. And then essentially this could move forward, okay? So what's our point here? This was an intrusive use of the drone. It was unlawful under these facts. And Fritz, you gave me a scenario where we had the DV suspect. And they're essentially doing the same thing. And I said, we're good to go because they had crew. They had the recognized exception of agency. Here, they didn't have it. Now the cops,
Right.
they didn't have it.
Yeah.
I mean, even without the drone, they were still violating his rights because they basically detained him inside of his house. But you get my point. So if you're going to be kind of like I call it the peep and Tom rule, if you're going to be like looking in people's windows and looking for private information inside of a house, you are likely intruding on the Fourth Amendment.
And that wasn't drone specific. I mean, if they looked in his house by any other means, it would have been a violation, or at least
Only if they did it intrusively, though. If they did it from the street, no.
what if they
right?
walked up and looked in?
Well, if they walked in, then we're in the same boat.
Yeah, yeah.
They're like right next to the window. We did like this. They're in the exact same boat.
What about the distance of the drone? Say you're 200 feet away looking in versus right up on the window. Do you think
Well,
that was
I think
relevant?
it's relevant, absolutely. And the next question is are we using magnification? See, that's where that whole, is it just a regular camera deal? Is it a 2, 3, a 2 times, a 3 times? I can work with that, right?
Sure,
But
yeah.
if it's like a 10 times, 15 times, then the court is likely going to say you crossed that line. Okay, The next type of search is trespass. Real quick, we have our Seminole Jones case. The FBI put a GPS tracker on this guy Antoine Jones's Grand Cherokee. They track him. They find his stash house. They get a warrant for the stash house, and they said that he had like $1 million in cash and 100 kilos of cocaine. By the way, Fritz, it was a good find. 100 kilos. That's a lot. That's a lot. So they found that this was a search because of the trespass issue. Regardless of privacy, right? Does he have a privacy interest in his public whereabouts? Maybe, but they didn't address it that way. They said it's a trespass issue. Did the police physically intrude onto a protected area? And was their intent to gather information, right? Okay. How does this apply to doctrines? Well, guys, girls, my friends, I'm telling you, I'm going to go old school on this, and I'm going to bring back a case that a lot of even attorneys would not have made the connection to drones. And I'm kind of proud of myself because this is a very interesting case. It's U.S. versus Cosby. Here's what happened. I think you like this video, right, Fritz? I mean, you got to give me a little credit on this. I like the chickens because it's all about chickens, okay? That's why I focus on the chickens. Here's what happened. So Cosby owns a farm, I believe in South Carolina. It might be North Carolina or South, I believe it's South Carolina. And the Air Force during the war set up a training base. He was adjacent near an airport, a municipal airport. And the Air Force was the Army Air Force, just to be correct. The Army Air Force was flying their warplanes like every single day, and taking off and landing, and it killed his chickens because they're freaking out over the airplane. And he said, that's a taking under the Fifth Amendment. You owe me money for this because you're basically making my property unusable. And the Supreme Court agreed. The reason now, this is fundamentally a Fifth Amendment case. That's a takings, right? You have to give just compensation for taking. However, here is the connection that each time it's still a physical trespass of the airplanes over his usable airspace. Now, drone use will almost never be a takings. Okay, you would have to have drone using. You would have to have a police officer flying a drone over somebody's backyard like every single day, and they can't even go outside to have a takings issue. However, it's a trespass issue. As the court said, we think that the landowner, as an incident to his ownership, has a claim to the usable airspace above his land, and that the invasions of it are in the same category as invasions of the surface, meaning cop walking in a backyard, clear Fourth Amendment violation. Or no, I'm sorry, Fourth Amendment issue. Flying a drone so low over curtilage can also be a Fourth Amendment issue in and of itself. Okay. Okay. So sporadic use will never be a taking. That's not what this case is about. That's not how I'm interpreting it. Mm-hmm. It's just that it helps the trespass issue. Let's talk about the key drone case. And this is by far one of the most seminal cases on this topic. Long Lake Township versus Maxon. In fact, somebody in this chat actually named that case. So good for them, right? They're talking about it. So what happened in a nutshell is that the Maxons are hoarders, and they go into an agreement with Long Lake to actually remove the junk vehicles and so forth. But they don't do it. So in order, and look, Bob. Oh, look, Bob Meter's here. Man, that's a big name right there, Bob. It's awesome to have you here. Bob is a giant in the search and seizure space as well. And so so anyway, going back to so what happened in Maxon is they hire a commercial drone operator. And they take pictures of Maxon's backyard to prove the junk vehicles, but they not only take the pictures and so forth, but they fly over it physically. Now, Maxon is going to come out. The court is going to hold that the government not only violated Maxon's reasonable expectation of privacy, but also physically trespassed. So either way, the government has a problem. They said that the landowners are entitled to ownership of some airspace above their properties, such that intrusions into that airspace will constitute a trespass no different from an intrusion upon the land itself. Any reasonable person would have expected low altitude drone overflight to be trespassory and exceptional. So there has to be this consideration about at what point do I cross that line? It's important for my people to understand here that that case was ultimately vacated. And the reason why is because this was a civil damages case. I'm sorry, a civil enforcement case. It wasn't criminal. And we don't apply the exclusionary rule to civil cases. However, arguably, if Maxon would have taken their fight, the Maxins would have taken their fight to civil rights, like the civil rights violation, kind of like what happened in Dirks. Arguably, they could have gotten some money for that. The civil violations, the code enforcement violations, were ultimately upheld. Does that make sense, Fritz?
So they didn't lose the evidence. They could use
They didn't lose the evidence in a civil case.
But they exposed themselves to some liability based on
That's right.
trespass.
That's right. And if it was a criminal case, then the evidence would have been suppressed, right? A stolen vehicle and so forth.
Right, right.
Now, what I teach here, okay, is this. I teach that drones should really not fly over curtilage, especially when they're relatively low, unless there's crew. If you don't fly over curtilage, you don't have a Cosby argument. You don't have a Maxon issue. Then it's purely privacy. I think this is very, very important.
So
Please.
let's clarify the language here. You're not talking about flying over. You're talking about flying over and looking down to gather
Correct.
evidence.
That's
Okay.
right. We're not talking about going to a if you're on a mission and you're heading to
Right.
555 Main Street, you absolutely should take the route as the crow flies, right? I mean, that's
Right,
safe.
exactly. Right.
But we're talking about you have to add that extra element. And first of all, just the second thing is just to recognize that a lot of your pilots that are flying, your drones and so forth, they probably are, even if they are flying intentionally over curtilage, and even intentionally
Just
trying to look for a stolen car.
Oh, I see.
I don't know if they're going to make that trespass argument because they're not going to be so low. They shouldn't be low, right?
Yeah, generally 200 to 400 feet, right?
Exactly. And that's not usable airspace, not for them. It only becomes an issue when
Not
you're
for the
just
people on the ground, you mean?
huh?
Not usable for the people on the ground?
It's not usable for the people on the ground. It's not usable to the homeowner.
Exactly.
Right? 200 feet, so that's pretty high. I mean, I'm nowhere near using that airspace. Now, you bring in a helicopter and it's blowing my chairs around, different, right? But
Yeah.
the drone is likely not going to be able. The defendant or the plaintiff, whatever position they are in, is not likely to make the argument that, hey, you flew over my curtilage at 200 feet, therefore it's a trespass. It's a very hard argument to make.
Let's dig into this
Please.
part because there's both the flyover and then they use the camera to look down and gather evidence, which you kind of need both at the same time. The new flock camera, you could read a plate at 2,000 feet. So a lot of times you're not going to be anywhere near over the house that you're looking at, right? Or the situation. You'll be like, and I think you hit on it, be at 300 or 400 feet at a 45-degree angle. So you'd be 1,500 feet in any direction. How does that impact curtilage in terms of flying, quote unquote, flying over?
Okay, so look, that's probably $1 million question right there because,
Yeah.
And the reason why it's so important is because the way you answer it, the way I would answer it. So we have to kind of go back a little bit of right to B, right to C. And at the end of the day, should there be a legal difference between me and I talk about being off center? I mean, that's the way I articulate because I'm not, I'm not an SME for drones, but I just say, hey, pilots, just don't be over the curtilage. Be that 45-degree angle business. If you're over the neighbor's yard, then the defendant cannot complain about that because not under trespass, because
Sure.
you're not over their property. So that's the way you should do it. Just before I answer your question, try to take out the trespass argument altogether and just have what's left is the privacy argument.
Right.
Don't try to
Eliminate
fight two
one
fronts
element
when you can just fight one.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, that's kind of easy to do because most of the time, you don't get right over a situation, look straight down on it, right? You want to kind of see horizontally what's happening.
Correct. So
you're going to have an offset.
that's right. So in Maxon, if they would have just been off center, off curtilage, they would never have those comments about trespassery because you can't make a trespass argument unless you actually are physically intruding into the usable airspace above your curtilage. And
Okay.
we're not, and open fields don't have that issue because that's Dow Chemical. Okay. Now going to what you said, if a judge is if the judge is on his or her A game and really understands the Fourth Amendment, they should uphold what just happened there. And here's why. The best case on this is Arno. Okay, it's a case out of California. It's a California Supreme Court case called Arno from the 1970s. And it's not a drone case, obviously. It's not an airplane case. It's a binocular case involving Playboy. So it has a little twist. What happened there is that LAPD got onto a hill and used a basically almost like a telescope. Okay, that's the right word. A
Hmm.
telescope. They used a telescope to look into the offices of the Playboy business, and they saw indecent material in plain view. The problem in Arno, though, is that they could not have seen that indecent material from any other lawful vantage point with the naked eye. So you are looking into a build, you are looking to an office, which is a private space. It's not a home, but it's close. It's a private office, like a doctor's office. And there is no lawful position to see, right to be, right to see, because there was no building next to it. They had to go this hill, and this hill was like, I forget, but it was several hundred yards away. So far, you follow, right? And it was
Right.
only because of this telescope they actually can see the indecent material. The court rightfully held that that was a search under the Fourth Amendment. However, this is where the mic drop happens. The court also said if the LAPD detective could have seen the exact same information from any lawful vantage point, he could have seen the same thing 800 yards away. In other words, you don't have to be at the closest position to see the stuff in plain view, right to be, right to see. You can do a tactical advantage and go farther away so they don't know you're there and see the same thing with the telescope. So, to answer your question with the car, is there
Okay.
a lawful vantage point around that person's curtilage that they could have been in using, unmagnified or lightly magnified, just unmagnified to be the best way, unmagnified vision, cameras to see that stolen car? And the answer is almost going to always be yes. It does not make a constitutional difference as an Arno to go 1,000 feet away or 1,500 feet away and see the same thing. That is the right answer. However, you got to be on your A game and make that argument because the defense is going to be, well, it's still this high tech equipment and it's spying on people. And you know what I'm saying? But you got to
Right.
bring in Arno to say that no, constitutionally, it's no different.
Do you have to know that going in? Do you
Yes.
have to say, okay,
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, you can't decide after the fact, even though that you could have seen
Um,
it anywhere.
I'm
Or
sorry. I cut you off a tad early. Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
Maybe not. Okay. You don't have to necessarily like know all your P's and Q's and like, oh, however, I will tell you that if you don't get ahead of it, if you don't realize that that's legally what's going on, it is kind of hard to fix afterwards because now you have a credibility issue, you have a fact finding issue. Was that property really in plain
Right.
view? And I mean, maybe with the drones, it's not that hard, but you should recognize that that's what's going on, so that you write your report in a way that kind of reflects that you could see the same thing being closer, but for mission purposes and tactical reasons, you flew a little farther and used magnification.
Got it.
Okay, so let's keep going. All right, the future, right? So, and we're doing good on time here. We're doing well on time here, and we're gonna have some time for your questions, which I'm sure you're gonna have. Okay, so the future. So courts and politicians, in my view, seem inclined to analyze these drone issues, air surveillance, on a sliding scale of intrusiveness. There are a lot of journal articles on what I'm talking about today. A journal article is a peer-reviewed academic article. Okay, they're kind of hard to read sometimes. Sometimes just reading the synopsis is actually good enough. You got to get an idea what they're saying, but they almost uniformly agree in one thing: that the 1980 Supreme Court, 1986, 1989, Riley, Serial, and Dow Chemical, they never really envisioned drones. They were basically saying, and I think we can all agree that helicopter and planes are so exceptional and so relatively rare, and just they have all these rules. You got to be relatively high. that they're just not really invading on expectation of privacy. And and also, they had to make the rules that way because if they said jumping into a helicopter and intentionally looking in somebody's backyard as a search, well, boom, you just, I mean, talk about the ramifications of that. So just appreciate that the academics, and I agree with this point of view, is they're saying that if this was a drone case under the same facts going to the U.S. Supreme Court, they're not going to look at it as game on, like, oh, okay, they're going to understand that drones are not helicopters. I do want to show you a video, and I think you can understand it's videos like this that would reasonably cause people some concern that we can have a drone creep issue, right? Mission creep, function creep, that some people that make the decisions for us, like our politicians and stakeholders and so forth, they're worried about, yeah, everything sounds great today, but what about 10 years from now? What are you going to use that drone for? And here's an example. This video is about 2 minutes. I'll just probably just turn off my camera, but let's watch the drone video. Watch this video because I think it actually relays a good point I'm trying to make.
In the small town of Westport, Connecticut, a drone is scanning for COVID-19 symptoms. And the reaction here is, well, mixed. Police have been flying drones here since 2016 for everything from traffic management to search and rescue. And they can use them to spot and warn people who are gathered too closely. But now, Dragonfly, the company that makes the drones, claims they can also detect whether you're running a fever, sneezing, or coughing heavily, all through a single camera flying 40 feet overhead.
Subtle differences are on like a millimeter type of basis. So if somebody's coughing, you know, like this or like this, it's actually quite a different type of cough actually that they're detecting.
The police chief says this partnership could help the town reopen, and they need every tool possible.
In a pandemic, we'll see the elevated temperatures, we'll see the increase in blood pressure, we'll see the flushed skin. So to have the technology available for future incidents, whether it be COVID related or something else that comes our way, I think we need to prepare for that.
This is the first time Americans have been scanned for symptoms in this way, and there are skeptics.
I don't know that this technology could distinguish between somebody with COVID-19 and somebody with influenza. I'm inclined to doubt it.
Not to mention that many infected people never exhibit obvious symptoms. And even if it does work, are we ready to be scanned from the air?
The involvement of the police makes me more worried about how this technology might have what we sometimes call function creep, in that it is used and designed for one purpose, but then it gets repurposed for other things.
Do you believe that we're going to have to strike some kind of necessary compromise with the desire for privacy in order to get out of this thing?
Public health has built into it the need sometimes to invade people's privacies.
The chief says it's all just research, but the police will see and save everything.
By no means will we single out an individual and say, hey, look, you look like your temperature is elevated.
Will you be hanging on to data that Dragonfly is collecting, or does that somehow go around you?
Any missions, so to speak, that we fly with our drones, we keep those records.
The ACLU of Connecticut responded this week saying that any new surveillance measure that isn't being advocated for by public health professionals and restricted solely for public health use should be promptly rejected. Is this the kind of thing we'll have to use in order to gather in public again?
Do we really want to be entering into convention centers if they don't have a health monitoring system that can give us an indication or a reading of what is the potential risk?
Keep a safe distance of 6 feet from others.
All right. So, sometimes this quote is used, right? The thought of the government drones buzzing overhead, monitoring the activity of law-abiding citizens runs contrary to the notion of what it means to live in a free society. So, drones are great, right? We all the drones are obviously seminal. They're here to stay. They're going to save lives, but we also want to make good case law. And the court and the public and so forth, they recognize that drones are not airplanes. There is some public anxiety about being monitored, and some stakeholders want additional suppression suppression rules. They want suppression for example, in Nevada. If we violate state law, then the evidence gets suppressed even in a civil trial and so forth. And so why drones are not helicopters? This is from a journal article that I read. Number one, this is just the realistic reasons why the case law cannot be one for one. Number one is the cost. They're obviously a fraction of the price. I do have to tell you that I have some kind of, like, when I go to ICP, Hope Airbus is not here today, but I walk into ICP, I see that beautiful multi-million-dollar Airbus, and I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm looking at the past a little bit because a lot of those Airbuses are not used for search and rescue; they're actually used for survey, for patrolling. And I think a DFR program is going to be way less and a lot more effective, right? And so the next one is the persistence of it. That there is just real restrictions on flying drones 24/7. They have battery life. They don't fly. Of course, it's getting better, but just the constant, you have all these drones persistent, the precision of it, especially with the equipment that they're using, they are as good as anything else on a helicopter in many ways. Probably not totally true, but you get my point. And they're just invisible, right? You really don't know a drone is up there. I have a drone. I fly my drone. If the drone's at 400 feet, you do not see it at all. You have no idea that it's up there. And so political stakeholders are just kind of concerned about those issues. It's something that I believe you can get ahead of. And I'm going to, we'll get into the Q&A portion. I think Fritz has some feedback on this as well. But the big takeaways is that living in a technological society does mean giving up some privacy. Absolutely. Cameras and, license plate readers. These are all things that in the end help, right? But the latest Supreme Court cases assume that cost, rarity, visibility, they're also more originalist today than they ever have been. And we do have to be prepared to argue that we're not going past this point where the framers would have never contemplated or allowed. And I think this might be a good example. This is not a drone case, but this is a modern surveillance case that just maybe Baltimore went a little too far on. This was called the AIR program, AIR, where essentially they leased this equipment, from this company that did daytime surveillance of the entire city, and it was able to replicate people's movements and actually solved a lot of crime. Like, hey, there was a car stolen, right? Well, they can go back in time and see a person walking towards that car. So it was almost like, it was actually pretty incredible. But the court found that was an unreasonable invasion of privacy to understand like where everybody's whereabouts. Now, drones are nowhere near to that capacity. However, it's just that thinking about this aerial surveillance that you can cross these lines. And one of the last quotes I'll tell you before we kind of transition into the Q&A is this quote came out in 1989 by Justin Brennan. Look what he says here. Look, this is kind of prolific, I think. He said, imagine a helicopter capable of hovering just above an enclosed courtyard or patio without generating any noise, wind, or dust at all, and for good measure without posing any threat of injury. Suppose the police employing the miraculous tool to discover not only what crops people were growing in their greenhouses, but also what books they were reading and who their dinner guests were and so forth. Finally, FAA regulations remain unchanged. They had every right to be where they were. All right. Would this be, he's saying, would this be an infringement on the Fourth Amendment? And that's what I'm here for. Okay. I want cops. I want agencies to embrace the drone. I love them. I'm the first proponent of it. I love them. But just kind of know where the lines are. I don't get into state law too much here, but I will tell you that most states have passed some kind of laws affecting aerial surveillance, and states are allowed to be more restrictive under the Fourth Amendment. That is one of the growing trends, by the way, that I see that I'm trying to hopefully enable officers to push back on, is that a lot of states are going to the whole warrant first model. That in order to do quote unquote surveillance, you got to get a warrant. I don't think that's the right way to do it. I think that what I'm trying to teach you and teach other people that come through, our classes is that there is already a system in place, a good system, a system that's already been placed and been litigated for 200 years, 250 years, and that's the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment has already answered a lot of these questions, not all of them, but we have a lot of good cases out there that tell us what the rules are. So going to a judge every single time just to do something that implicates surveillance, which is a broad term, which meaning you want to use it for investigatory purposes, is really not the right answer. The better answer is for agencies to have a policy, to maybe talk about data retention issues after a case is closed, or you have, that somebody's not involved in a particular crime. Maybe you have to get rid of that data. Those things I think are better, right? Yeah. So exceptions, okay? All these states do have exceptions. They have exigency, which is a great, the DV example that Fritz brought up. One thing I want to tell you, though, before we leave is we do have a case that was decided in January 2026, which tells us what level of proof we need to deploy that drone under exigency. It's actually great. It's just a objectively reasonable basis to believe that an emergency, that somebody needs help, right? Or substantial bodily harm will occur, or death and so forth, or serious harm. That answers the question about, hey, do we need probable cause to fly the drone and look in people's windows? No. You need something closer to reasonable suspicion, but you don't really call it that because reasonable suspicion is for crimes, and we don't necessarily know if a crime is occurring. A suicidal subject may not actually, that's not a crime, right? So the court said, we conclude that the probable cause standard barred from criminal context is inapt. We instead hold that just what we had held before, that the officers may enter if, but only if, they have an objective reasonable basis for believing that an occupant faces serious danger. That is very, very good. Search and rescue is common. Disaster response, and finally, consent is usually in the statute. Okay, now if you're interested, you tell us here, okay? Give Fritz and I feedback. If you're interested, I would love to maybe put together a webinar that actually goes deeper into those state issues. I can actually tell you, and Fritz can, talk about his experiences and so forth, about, hey, what are states doing? Give me some like real examples. Give me some examples of where states probably got it wrong, and some states that are actually probably on the right track in our view, because I want you to be prepared to talk to your legislature, your city council, because they're going to have these questions. They're going to want to know, are you going to weaponize the drone? Are you going to use it for misdemeanors? And I was talking to Fritz before the class, and we talked about a good example, and it's like the weaponizing the drone issue. You really don't want your state to pass a law that even gets into that. And what you want, I don't think we should be weaponizing drones necessarily. That's for the military, and there's a time and a place for everything. Maybe there's a time and a place for lethal force, obviously. But the way these laws are written, oftentimes they're so broad that they envelop other activity that should not be restricted, like using a drone potentially for less lethal force, to end a standoff, to de-escalate a violent situation. So, and actually Ron says there's already federal regulations against weaponizing drones. That's true. But you don't want the state to do it, because sometimes they'll write the law in a way that prohibits using them for other, for non-lethal and so forth. So moving forward, if you don't have this book, it's maybe Fritz, do you know how they can get this book?
We're going to send it to them if they registered for this.
Good. Okay. So,
yeah.
So everyone that registered for this is going to actually get this book from Flock directly. I will tell you that out of a lot of material I've read, outside from other organizations and so forth, I think this is one of the best because it's very readable, it's simple, but there's a couple things, 4 things that I really kind of I just want to harp on before we end this and do Q&A. Number one is, as Flock recommends, you really kind of you got to get ahead of you got to have a policy, and you have to address some of the things that I think we spoke about here. What are your deployment practices? When are you going to deploy this drone? When you go before city council and they're asking you, how is this going to be used? You should have an answer for that. And you should have some restrictions potentially, right? Training priorities. If you go before your city council or your government agency and you're like, hey, you're on, we've actually taken training on this. And I'm not saying from Blue to Gold, we're just one of many, I'm sure. But take some training on this. Let them know that you take this stuff seriously, that you understand the Fourth Amendment implications here. You're going to get a certificate for this class. Show it. Look, we talked about these legal issues here, and we have a better idea about what's off limits and so forth. and what safeguards are in place. So I think these are all important. This is all in that book that you're going to get from Flock. Definitely keep it, download it, reference it, and so forth. My big three takeaways is this. Number one is you have to understand that when you're pointing that drone intentionally, not just mere overflight, not incidental overflights, not going to your call for service. Those are not what we're talking about here. And states are not really worried about the inadvertent observations. That they shouldn't be, because it's not, you can't control that. They're talking about the intentional surveillance of a home or its curtilage. That's what most, they'll say where you have an expectation of privacy. They're talking about homes. You have to know the rules here. You have to have an idea about when the Fourth Amendment is implicated. Policies and training. And my biggest thing is that the privacy framework already exists. I think that we have a system in place, and it doesn't have to be rewritten in, some things, maybe retention policies and so forth. But I think the Fourth Amendment is really, it serves us well. And I think it can answer a lot of our questions.
Okay. I think that's my key takeaway.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
I could sum that a lot of the chiefs that are, starting up these programs, they're wondering what's unique about the drone, what's different, what might I be violating that I'm not aware of. And the takeaway here is, if you follow the policies, best practices, you already understand the elements.
Yep. Absolutely. Now we're going to open it up. Just remind, if you have any questions, I'll just tell you right now, the best way to answer or to ask questions on this is to actually let us turn your mic on, so you can actually ask the question live. Typing a question out, especially with a webinar like this, can be complex. So who in here has a question? We can hit a button on our end, and we can you can turn your mic on and we can just talk. We can talk it out. So who has a question for me or Fritz, especially Fritz, because he is obviously your SME. Just say me, I have a question, and let's kind of go from there. Also, remember, and Teresa, do me a favor, if you have this the link for this, remember to also take a look at this book, right? This book is really there for you. It's free and so forth. So you're going to get something from Flock, which is excellent. And this is the legal stuff I spoke to you about. All right. And everybody's going to get a recording of this. So who has a question? Anybody have a question? Okay. John, can we turn the mic on? Just answer it live. Let me try here. All right. 1 second here. There's a lot of people here, so I got to find the Johns. Here we go. Hey, John, just if you can click yes on your end, then we can talk.
Hey, can you hear me now?
I can.
All right. So we've got a lot of rural area, and we also have a lot of people who are on Project Lifesaver in our area, autistic children, adults with dementia, things of that nature. And whenever they elope, because there's such a heavily wooded area, lots of hills, lots of valleys, it's hard for us to get permission from each landowner prior to going on their property. If we are using the drone to fly over and either attempt to find those people or rule out that they are there, what kind of implications would there be there?
Fritz, you want to take a stab at that first?
I think that happens all the time. I think that you're just flying over. You're allowed to be in the air, so you're right to be up there, and you're looking down and using probably thermal and vision camera to see someone. You're not looking inside structures or anything like that, unless you think they might be in there. But I don't think there's any Fourth Amendment issues there at all, right?
No, there's not, because it's open fields. It's a Dow Chemical issue, right? So they may, we may have some state law cases or some state law restrictions. Nevada, even then, even in Nevada, which has a very restrictive drone law, it wouldn't even be implicated there. But we're also allowed to deploy a drone, even if it was a privacy interest, which we're not with these facts. You have agency, I'm sure, right? You probably have agency as well.
And I assume that would apply as well for a fleeing suspect, maybe trying to head towards a barn to hide out, anything like that.
Absolutely. And that actually falls under that whole, like, that agency. It falls under, I believe, the case versus Montana, the one I just showed you that was decided in January, that involved a suicidal subject and so forth. But I think the standard is the same for all these agency cases. There's agency to get that person to custody as soon as possible, because it could result in a fatal shooting of a homeowner coming out. They shoot, they hear a bump in the night. Somebody's hiding in their shed, or the bad guy shoots the homeowner. So there's agency there for sure.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Okay. 1 second here. So, okay. I just have to figure out how to.
I see a couple of questions on Part 91 versus Part
Do you
107.
want to get them on mic, or do you want to just answer it like that?
We can if we get them on mic, but I could just kind of talk about the difference. I would say that under, like, most, I'd say the vast majority of DFR programs, drone as first responder programs, operate under Part 91, which is a public aircraft operator division of the CF code. It basically says you, as an agency, you're running your own air unit, you're certifying your own aircraft, you're certifying your own pilots. You're maintaining all your documents, your safety management system, et cetera. And that's essentially what I do with our customers, is ensure that they understand what that is, make sure they have the resources, make sure they're organizing things and managing their program correctly. Because of this, because of the responsibility falls on these government agencies, and they're accountable to their community and accessible, and et cetera, the FAA has allowed some of these advanced capabilities. So you're more likely to get a waiver for beyond visual line of sight with, ability to fly over people and stuff. So most agencies, the vast majority that want to do advanced operations that include beyond visual line of sight and flight over people, will go the Part 91 way and get a certificate of waiver. And the FAA just recently changed the process to get that, is since last May, actually. And so I think we went from 30 or 40 agencies doing it across the world, or now there's in the US alone, probably over 1,000 agencies that have this waiver. So the use case is really taken off.
Awesome. If you have any follow-up questions on that, let us know. But I'm going to get Eric on. Ryan, if you want to ask your question on the mic, please let me know. But Eric is up next. Hold on. And then when I get you on, Eric, also tell us what state you're in, if you don't mind.
Hi, guys. Can you hear me?
Hey, buddy. Yep.
Hey, so I'm from Oregon, so Ninth Circuit. And I believe our state law says it's basically reasonable suspicion for deployment and exigency. So the "and" element is in there.
Yep.
And for suicidals, we do have restricted airspace here. So we do have to get authorization for people that don't know. And so once we get Lance approval for a suicidal situation, we essentially, how we're doing it right now is we have to have reasonable suspicion for a crime. That's kind of what we're going in based off of, just because of the vague understanding whether or not we can deploy when it comes to suicidal only calls, essentially. So my question to you guys is, like, what's your understanding for suicidal only type calls and UAS involvement with law?
Well, I'll take the first part of that, and Fritz may hopefully have something to add if he. But the first part is that very issue, I think, has been answered as well as it can be by Case versus Montana, because that was a suicidal call. They said that reasonable suspicion is not really the right standard, because just like you said, right? It's not a crime. It's a person in need, and so. But if you're reading your law, and I do not know exactly what Oregon law says on this issue.
Sure.
But if you're saying that Oregon law requires reasonable suspicion for a crime to deploy that drone, then that's a state restriction that the Fourth Amendment would obviously not have a problem with.
Mm-hmm.
Anything, Fritz? Anything to add?
I can't really comment on that individual state law. I do know that the state laws are certainly much more restrictive than probably the interpretation of the Fourth Amendment laws. I think there's a lot of states using drones pretty, I wouldn't say liberally, but for any situation where a life might be in danger, or to safeguard human life, or to reduce response times to emergency situations. So there's a lot of there's a vast ability to use drones in everyday policing, and the restrictions might be within the agency or within the state, which wouldn't be as restrictive as they have to be. It's a basically a choice.
Mm-hmm.
You can also do a plug, which is exactly why I'm here, because I don't, that law was probably, but it's just I don't want law. This issue was already resolved by by the Supreme Court. The Fourth Amendment already has your answer on that, right? It's objective reason to believe that an emergency exists. I just think that that's part of now we potentially have an issue where you have an issue in Oregon where you can deploying this drone force something that really that should be deployed. It should be a deployment because you can save a life, you can save a cop's life, you can save their life. But I guess there's an issue because the law was written with good intent, but now it seems overly restrictive, right?
There's a lot of fear with drones. There's relatively new, a little dystopian initially, but I think with the advancement of DFR and like I said, 1,000 agencies doing this, and agencies are doing a great job publicizing their wins and the incidents where they're saving lives or finding missing kids or reducing overall emergency response times. I think when people see the advantage and the agencies that are deploying these programs are accessible and accountable and vocal and getting community permission, it's just a matter of reducing the fear and definitely understanding the upside of the cost benefit analysis. Like what are we getting when we're giving up this level of privacy you talk about?
Hopefully, Eric, do we help?
Yeah, no, you guys did. I do appreciate it. And I really like how you guys mentioned earlier the avoid the trespass premises argument, and I think that I'll take that in consideration when we deploy on a search warrant or active scenario where we're flying overhead. I think instead, approaching it at that angle,
right,
it defeats the whole premises issue. So thank you.
You're welcome. And the only thing I would say though is remember, if you have a search warrant, then the intrusion's already been authorized. Well, actually, so I do teach to put drone language in the search warrant. So if you don't have that language in there, then that even better. But usually cops should get drone approval. If they're going to get a warrant, why not just throw some drone language in there? And I think most cops do that. All right, Ryan is next.
Hi there.
Hey, buddy, what state are you in?
In California.
Cool. What you got?
Again, it's talking about the fresh pursuit. So, the courts have kind of found that, fresh pursuit must be continuous and out without unreasonable delay. So if, you lose sight of the person, you now stop, you're now waiting for your drone team to show up or whatever, deploy the drone, does that unreasonable delay would that be considered that, or would it still be okay for the fresh pursuit?
All right. So first of all, I love this question. So because it's definitely my wheelhouse. So I will tell you, I do teach I teach hot pursuit and fresh pursuit. Now, just like you said, there is some interchangeability with this, but I do think there as a foundational principle to kind of separate the two. Okay. Hot pursuit in my world, in the way I teach it and what cops are, is that hot pursuit is what you just described, which is you're hot on the suspect's tail. I think that's what you're talking about. You're trying to chase after somebody, but they got lost in the woods or something.
Correct. Or you're in a neighborhood and you lose sight of them, and now you're bringing in the drone with thermal and all that to find them.
Correct. So that's hot pursuit. But you'll find plenty of cases that refer to as fresh pursuit. Mm-hmm. Fresh pursuit is a different, and the reason they're separate because hot pursuit is you're hot on the suspect's tail, and the rules for that are kind of what you're talking about. And then there's fresh pursuit, and I like to say you're fresh on the suspect's trail, and that is your armed robbery suspect. A witness got a plate. You track them down to their home. Do you kick in the door after 30 minutes and take them off the couch and take them custody, right? That's a fresh pursuit question. Okay. So now let's go back to your pursuit question. Hot pursuit, fresh pursuit. Again, I'd like to, because the rules are a little different. When you're hot on a suspect's trail, there is this break of continuity issue, right? If you lose the person, then there is this argument that it's no longer hot. It's stale. However, the problem there is that whole logic really only applies to homes. So your classic example, and there's some California cases on. In fact, I'll give you the California case. The California case was where a teenager was being pulled over by a motor. He's being pulled over by a motor officer. He did not pull over. Instead, he went home. He walked into his house. The cop, smartly in a sense, did not like go after him because he didn't. It was a danger. Probably thought it was a dangerous situation. He wanted to wait for the cavalry. The cavalry arrived 10 to 15 minutes later. They knocked on the door. The dad answered. He says, "You're not coming in my house," right? They pushed right past them. They grabbed the teenager and they arrested him. And the court upheld it as a proper hot pursuit because you don't get penalized just for using good tactics and calling the cavalry. But remember, though, we only have a hot pursuit question or issue if you actually are dealing with a private space. If you have a person who's fled into a forest or an open field type area, then you have no search at all. And you don't need.
Would that change with like a neighborhood, where the person in backyards and of such?
Okay, the answer is no. If you're just using plain vision, right? If you're not using thermals and so forth, and you're just using right to be, right to see, And now if you're gonna hover low and you're gonna go looking, you're gonna drop it down and actually look into a shed, then of course we have that trespass issue, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're just doing like patrol of a neighborhood and just like looking for the bad guy, then okay, fine, you may implicate the Fourth Amendment. But the next thing is the thermal imaging, which most cops are going to want to use, right? Well, we do know under Kylo that pointing a thermal imager at a house can implicate the Fourth Amendment because you can see stuff inside the house that implicates privacy. However, if you objectively believe that the person could be in this area, these backyards, you're allowed to use it because there's exigency.
Okay.
Because going to the backyard and running someone's backyard is exigency. It could result in a fatal shooting or a use of force against a homeowner and so forth, or a home invasion.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Fritz, anything to add? That's probably anything to add on that? Abram, you're up next, by the way.
No, you explained it pretty well. I mean, the key takeaway, maybe a broader question.
Please.
Given your understanding of police drone activity, particularly related to drone as first responder, are you seeing anything that you hear is happening on a regular basis that gives you concern?
Well, okay, it's the two things. It's one, it is the trespass issue. Just it's something that a lot of cops are not thinking about. Just they look at Maxon, right? If just don't fly over curtilage if you don't have to. I just would like to get that out of the way. I think I talked about that enough. But it is looking into windows and so forth. That's about it. I got to tell you, actually, I should answer really I don't see a lot of. I'm not seeing a lot of missions that really violate the Fourth Amendment or are making bad case law. I got to tell you, I really don't. I think that these are exceptions to the rule. Even in the Dirks case, which was the barricaded suspect, the reason that all ended bad is because the cops got it wrong to begin with. They thought he was a barricade and he had no right to refuse the child inspection, right?
Right.
But most of those cases are going to be legit. He probably will be a barricaded subject, and you can look into the windows, and you should look into the windows. So yeah. I really don't see a lot of bad drone deployments. I see a lot of great ones, though. Okay, who's next? Abram. I don't see Abram on here. Who has a question? We have a few more minutes. This is your time to. Oh, we are here, Abram. I don't know why I didn't see you down there. Hold on. There you are. Okay, gotcha. Also, yeah, you're welcome for joining. Before you start, also, I think we have time for maybe one more question before we kind of wrap it up. And if you guys want us to come again and do this again, then let us know. But I know we have some appointments after this, so we're gonna kind of wrap this up. So we have time for one more question besides Abrams. If you want your question answered, let me know in the chat, and I will line you up. What's up, Abram?
Thanks for taking the time, guys. So my question is, I have a code enforcement request to survey homeless encampments on a stretch of railroad that is owned by the city but managed by the railroad, meaning the railroad can limit access to that stretch of road. The stretch of road is covered or bordered on two sides by 12-foot high fences. and the railroad has not given permission to our code enforcement to walk through there or any other access through there. So our code enforcement wanted the use of drones to survey and map out homeless encampments due to the rising crime and fires around the area. My policy restricts any type of surveillance unless there's a crime involved or some type of public safety interest. What is the guidance on any Fourth Amendment or right to privacy issues in this case?
Before I have my viewpoint, Fritz, do you have anything you want to take anything first, or you want me to answer this one?
I mean, I've heard that use case quite often. Usually I'm dealing with like, do we have permission via the airspace to get up there, and what kind of equipment to use, and tactically how to go about that. My understanding of the Fourth Amendment doesn't raise any red flags in terms of that. It seems like a public safety interest. It's an area that they're allowed to be otherwise, or at least be able to gain a view otherwise, right?
Yep.
So I don't see any red flags.
So yeah, so the first question that we have to answer is, and did you say what state you're in? Not that it really matters. I'd like to know.
Okay. California, sorry.
Cali. Okay. So look, I mean, obviously, you have your stakeholders, right? I mean, the Bay Area is going to be different than Lufkin, Texas, right? But when it comes to the Constitution, the first thing we have to even ask ourselves, and California is actually the best state when it comes to these search and seizure issues, because your state requires that you interpret your search and seizure provisions under the Fourth Amendment. You can't be more restrictive, even though your legislature wants to be. So that's one thing I love about California. So regardless, whatever the Fourth Amendment says is what California has to say. Did you know that, by the way, by law?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have a constitutional provision that says that. Anyway, I digress. So the first question we have to answer is this even a Fourth Amendment issue? Do these people in the homeless encampments have a Fourth Amendment right to privacy? Well, the answer is they can. So again, this is what I get paid to do. I have to get into the weeds a little bit, but there are three types of encampments. Okay, so bear with me, and I'll. It's not going to take long, but it's not like a yes or no in my brain, because there's number one is, do you think the person is lawfully present? If the person is lawfully present, then you can implicate the Fourth Amendment because it's like a home, right? But these people are not lawfully present, correct? Okay. The next one is, have they, because of where they're at and the way they've been treated in the past, have they developed a reasonable expectation of privacy? Well,
Yes.
that is, right, and by the way, that's your LA Skid Row case. There's actually a case on this.
Exactly.
Are you in LA area?
No, kind of in Long Beach, just south.
Yeah, of course, Long Beach. So there was a case where, I mean, again, it's not directly applicable, but this case does tell us that you just can't be like, oh, they're homeless encampment. It's not illegal to be here. They have no privacy interest. Well, the Ninth Circuit has said otherwise, that a person can develop expectation of privacy if they're allowed to stay and they've been allowed there forever. That's your Skid Row, right? So before you start enforcing rules like, hey, get out of here in 10 seconds, there might be some notice and opportunity. And the last one is, so lawfully present. This is your wobbler. These ones in the middle where the encampments, and the last one is clearly they had no expectation of privacy. But that only answers whether or not they have expectation of privacy inside the tent itself. I think Fritz is still going to I'm going to have to agree with him on this, that at the end of the day, we're not looking, like, if you're looking in the tent intentionally and you're trying to use thermal imaging, maybe we can have some argument there, right? But just simply looking at the overall condition of the place and seeing, hey, what's going on here, doesn't even implicate the Fourth Amendment at all, because you're right to be, right to see. So maybe I should have answered that just and just get it over with. But I just want to realize that that's what the court's gonna have to do there. Is just, is there privacy interest? Like, what did you do? Is there a privacy interest? And then see if you have crew. But I don't think you need crew from here. I think you have a right to be. I think that there's no issue whatsoever.
Okay,
based on what you told me.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Okay, we have time we'll answer. We have 5 minutes left. Who has that last question? I think it was I want to say, was it who let's just, whoever's first. Last question. Who has the last question? Who wants to go on the mic? Going once. Going twice. Okay. I don't see anybody else here. All right. Oh, Anthony does. All right. Anthony. Hold on. I got you. All right. Anthony's going to be our last question of the day, unless poor Matt. Okay. Can we, Fritz, you got a few more minutes?
Sure.
I can't let Matthew go down, hold on. Okay. Well, I'll do a better job answering quickly too. Anthony, what you got?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. What state are you in too?
New Jersey.
Sorry.
So, yeah.
I'm from New Jersey. I was born in New Jersey, so I can get away with that. What you got?
So my question is kind of regarding like drug investigations and if we were using, we had a predetermined place that we were going to do a buy with a CI or an undercover. And we wanted to follow the vehicle when they left with the drone all the way back to their house. Or let's say we followed them to a point where we're not going to go any farther with the drone and then we're going to pass it off to a car. Is that something that would be allowed, or is that good because it's like public?
So
good, Fritz.
So in terms of allowed, I mean, obviously you want to, is it controlled airspace? Do you have the license to fly the drone, et cetera, and all that kind of stuff? But we're talking Fourth Amendment here. Could you do it in a car? Does a person have a reasonable expectation not to be followed? I mean, I worked undercover. I followed cars all day long everywhere. So to doing it with a car and doing it with a drone doesn't seem to me any different, even less intrusive with a drone. But that's my humble opinion.
100% agree. Also, not that it matters, but I teach a lot in New Jersey, and I'm also a New Jersey attorney. So I kind of keep track of, because New Jersey is one of those states that you got to be careful with, right, Fritz? I mean, you got your New Jerseys, New Yorks, New Mexicos, your Washingtons, your Oregons, your Montanas, your Hawaiis, and your Alaskas. And you got to be careful. So when my friend here comes online and says, "Hey, I'm
not talking to state law for sure, or department policies or anything, any localized restrictions that are over and above Fourth Amendment for sure."
Yeah, but I actually think that even in those states, especially New Jersey, I don't see any issue here at all. I think it's totally a FAA question, not a search and seizure question. So does that help?
Yes, for sure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, my brother. All right. Last one is Matthew. Matthew, you get the honor to ask the last question. And hopefully we do well by you and have an answer for you. So Matthew, hold on. A lot of Matthews. So Matthew, you do have two logins. I'm going to pick the first one. If you're not seeing on the right device, then I'll pick the other one. And so that's probably, there we are.
Am I the right one?
Yep.
There we go. Yeah, I had to head off the course. Thank you, first of all, for you guys having this course. This is great, and having me on. Kind of a flip side question, and this happened to me out on the street with my team. What can we do with engaging, interviewing, or even taking any kind of action with a member in the public who's operating a drone that one, it was a large drone, so I know it's over the 250, or the weight limit, and then the other is it was nighttime and possibly a restricted area as far as near an airport.
Fritz?
So yeah, you probably got the wrong people on here. There's a big science around counter drones, and we got plenty of people on my team that have a much deeper expertise than I do. Certainly, local law enforcement deals with this all the time. There's a lot of limitations. It depends on a lot of circumstances. Does they have a Part 107 license to fly? Is there airspace restrictions? Stuff like that. So I would call if you are the local cops, I'd look up what you can do. But I'm probably not the best answer for counter drone. I'm into using drones and letting public safety be enabled to use drones. So there's a whole different science on the counter drone.
So
okay.
All I can say, no, it's true. This is a counter, but all I can say is there's probably not much, right? But I can tell you that I was at a conference just like last week or the week before, and one of the vendors there was this, his company has a drone location radar, whatever you want to call that. And he talked about that. He talked about there was the guy was flying his drone over a concert, and they were able to like pin the guy, like they knew exactly where he was, and the cops went over and just arrested him or cited him. He actually was a Part 107 pilot, so he actually knew better than to fly over people in the concert and so forth. But I think that's the answer to your question is you're gonna have to like somehow track the person down, and you have reason to stop him. I mean, you think that it's maybe you have reason to stop him. He's interfering and so forth, but it's not going to be a constitutional issue. It's going to be a criminal law issue.
Yeah, and as far as our situation, we were actually conducting a like a roll call on a corner, and this is in the city of Chicago. We're Cook County,
Okay.
And he walked up while we knew his drone was surveilling us, but aside from that, knowing it's a nighttime drone, he has to be a 107 certified operator at that point, right? Okay.
Well, no, I didn't answer. I didn't say yes to that. Fritz has to answer that. I don't think you have to be 107 to fly at night.
No,
Right,
I mean you're supposed to have a waiver, but there's you can fly as a recreational pilot. There's a lot to unpack there. I definitely just detain, get the name, refer it to the FAA. They can look into what kind of air restrictions there was at the time, what kind of aircraft it was, whether they were certified as a 107 or not, whether they're qualified to fly without a 107.
The only thing I will add to this, and I think we're gonna probably do these more because I think a lot of people have questions, but I will tell you that there could be a First Amendment issue here. If you don't, in other words, if you're not able to put your finger on something specific that they may be violating, again, I think you may have reasonable suspicion here. But I do have officers ask me, hey, if they're filming our deployment, if they're a SWAT deployment or whatever, you got to be very careful because if the media could film that without repercussions, then a private person can do the same thing because the First Amendment applies to everybody, not just Fox News and CNN and so forth. So that's just one issue. I want you to make sure that and that's not where you were going with that, but if it's just hey, I'm observing police activities like the mission preparation and so forth, the briefing, you got to be careful about shutting somebody down just because they're filming something that you don't like them filming, right? Just to throw that out there.
Absolutely, and I think I agree with. That's where my thoughts were going. Is a reference to the FAA. It was a large drone, so I'm sure it had to be registered and all the other stuff to do. So cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, my friend. Guys, thank you so much. You will get a copy. Just remind everybody. And Teresa, do me a favor. Put in that link for our download. For everybody who is registered here, you're going to get a copy of this webinar. You'll get a video. You can download it. Yes, you can show it to your friends. Yes, you can play in training. You already have our permission to do that. Flock is also going to send you a separate email with their materials. Please take a look at them, what they have to offer. Obviously, if Blue to Gold is teaming up with them, we obviously believe in their mission and what they're doing here. It's just been fantastic to work with, Fritz and his partners and so forth. Fritz, have the last word.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great resource. If you're a drone program manager out there, please list this webinar and the certificate. Register it with your training files. It goes to the fact that you guys understand the responsibility that you have in managing and running a PAO and the responsibility to the community that you serve and, making informed decisions, being able to articulate why you're flying and doing what you're doing. It's good for all of us.
Yep. All right. We'll hopefully be back. Thank you guys so much. Let me end the recording.